right, Aaron.
Okay, episode 2.
Episode 2. Here we go.
Okay, chapter 2 of American Zion by Benjamin E. Park.
New History of Mormonism.
A new history of Mormonism.
The best kind.
The best kind of histories of Mormonism. New ones. Today, the name of the chapter is The Voice of the People, and we're covering the period between 1831 and 1846. And
including those endpoints.
And I have to say, I feel a bit hopeless.
Yeah.
It feels like it's way too much.
I understand what Dr. Park was attempting with this, but it does seem insane to cover all of Ohio and all of Missouri and all of Illinois in one chapter.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's a 40-page chapter, and yet, he's not wasting any time.
So
it's lean.
I think what excites me about this,
yeah,
right, is that what it means is that what he's doing is he's saving himself space for the entire history of the church.
Right, stuff we don't talk about it from a historical standpoint that often.
Like there's going to be a chapter on the 30s.
And the year you were born.
On the 70s.
Yeah.
Right? And stuff that is the 2000s, right?
Yeah.
Stuff that's more modern, right? And so this history of Mormonism is a more comprehensive look of the church as a whole, celebrating its 200 years.
It'll be 200 in 2030.
200 years in 2030 that we have. Ooh, that's going to be a big year, isn't it?
I imagine. Yeah.
Well, so how do you want to proceed? Do we need to split this one over 2 episodes, or do you think
I don't know. Here's the thing, Aaron.
Yeah.
I'm excited to get past this chapter because I feel like my knowledge of church history takes a precipitous drop once we get to Utah. And so I'm excited to leave Illinois, get across the plains, and dig into what happens next. That said, these are really fundamental years. There's a reason why we all know something about them.
Yeah.
And yeah, so on the other hand, it might be time really well spent to spend extra time here.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. I'm still learning things. Are you still learning things?
I hadn't heard of, hang on one second. I hadn't heard of Laura Hubble before.
Okay.
That was exciting.
I have a note. I want to talk about Laura Hubble.
Okay.
And what was it? This was on page 49.
49.
Yep. There was somebody else mentioned with her. Black Pete.
Yeah.
Right? I wanted to talk about those two. I think that's interesting. But,
yes, I'd only recently heard of Black Pete. He's a new addition to my knowledge, so it's not like and there is no such thing as deep knowledge on Black Pete. But yeah, no, this is an interesting moment in church history where they show up.
So the reason why it's so intimidating, right?
Yeah,
is because what Ben Park here has done is kind of split the early parts of Mormonism up into 2 parts, right? And the first part was the one that we did last time, which was from the early, even 1700s.
Even before Joseph Smith was born, through the New York period, basically.
Through the New York period, which was 1831, the organization of the church. And so for this chapter, we have the church as Joseph Smith ran it.
Yeah.
Right? So it is covering 3 different periods, really, Ohio, Missouri, and Illinois. And it covers the shenaniganery.
Yeah.
Right? And the revelations, the powerful highs and the crazy lows of that period.
It's essentially the church's book of Genesis. And like the book of Genesis, it's got everything.
Yeah, it really does. There's stuff in here that made me uncomfortable that I didn't really know much about. Like, should we just say out up front?
Yeah,
like,
so it's whatever you want.
Probing the edges of Joseph Smith's polygamy has always been something that I found uncomfortable, and it feels like private to me, and it feels like I'm not really sure I'm allowed to even talk about it. I mean, there's
so many holes in what we actually know, and then once you start speculating, one speculation takes you in the direction of another speculation, and you can end up with conclusions that aren't necessarily justified, though they may be reasonable.
Mm-hmm. Like when we've done polygamy as a whole, we've kind of come at it from the angle of a modern perspective and how we feel about it looking back and what we want the church to look like in the future, right? if you go all the way back to season 1, you could look at the Ghost of Eternal Polygamy, where we talked about.
Was that season 1?
Yeah. Can you? Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It's been a while. Yeah. Carolyn
Pearson. Yeah.
Carolyn Pearson's book, and talking
recently awarded the I forget the name of the award from the Bay Area Council for Latter-day Saint Studies. They recently gave her an award. I think
her a prize.
The second one they've given. Anyway, this first one's to Richard Bushman, I believe, and she got the second one, and it's for someone whose work within the sphere of Mormon culture or art or the academy or whatever has had really important, lasting impact, not just within the faith community, but in the world at large.
If I can find it, I'll put a link in the show
notes. Yeah, hopefully, yeah. And there's former member of the Berkeley Ward, Paris Fox, has a Vimeo page, and he does high quality recordings of all their events. And we can actually post the ceremony where ceremony is too strong a word, I suppose. The meeting where they awarded her with the award, and people spoke and talked about her and why she's great, and it's worth checking out.
Yeah, that sounds cool. What I want to comment on, though, is the this history. Like I said, it has some of the highest highs, like in terms of like the Pentecostal.
Sure. In Kirtland, Ohio.
In Kirtland, Ohio, with the temple and the amazing meetings that they had there, mm-hmm. The first endowment ceremonies. Yeah. But it has, this shadow of this polygamy, and it has this weird bank episode as well.
One that has the brutal
murders.
And it
has politics, and then, mm-hmm. of course, it ends with brutal murder.
It has some crummy presidents of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
You name it.
Yeah. So let's see if we can kind of state broadly for those members of our listening audience who haven't read the chapter and who maybe aren't familiar as much as this part of the church's history, what's going on, right? So Joseph Smith organizes the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which at the time was not known didn't have that name yet.
He goes through a couple name changes in this chapter.
Couple name changes. And they migrate to Jackson County, Missouri, mm-hmm. first, and then they are kicked out of there, even though they said it was going to be Zion, their new home.
Well, no, you skipped all of Ohio.
Okay. I thought that they went from there to Ohio and then back to Missouri.
So, let me see if I have this right.
Uh-huh.
Ben Park, don't listen to this episode.
Uh-huh.
So the missionaries left New York, and they passed through Ohio on their way to Missouri, where Zion is supposed to be. And while they're in Ohio, they convert a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And so geographically, by the number of saints, the center of the church kind of is in Ohio at that point.
Okay, in Kirtland?
In Kirtland. And so, and then they go off to Missouri, they do some missionary work, and then they come back. And anyway, then the New York saints move to Kirtland, and that's sort of the center of the church for a while, but the goal, in a way, becomes more and more clear to be Missouri. And eventually they do go to Missouri, and that's a disaster. And they end up in Illinois, which is a nice little Zion for a while, until that falls apart too. And that falling apart is kind of the end of this section.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what I have done here is I've picked out some things that, again, these things that I didn't know or that I wanted to talk about. But
you know what'd be helpful?
Yeah,
is a really great timeline, like they do for like the New Testament or something. Because you're right that it's confusing, because Ohio and Missouri, a lot of the important stories are happening at the same time. It's not exactly chronological. New York, Ohio, Missouri, Illinois. It's not really quite like that, because Ohio and Missouri are concurrent, and so it's a little hard to split it. For chronology and geography to match, it doesn't happen here.
Yeah. You know the Book of Mormon bookmarks that you can get?
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Nephites
the Travels
here,
of Paul map,
the Travels
sort
of
of
Paul
thing. Yeah, that's kind of what we need here.
We have a few maps of the early church in the Doctrine and Covenants, right?
Yes, we do.
So maybe some of those are helpful, but in general, yeah, I agree.
Also, breaking news.
Yeah.
If you get this out before Sunday, our listeners will be the first members of the ward to know it. If they're, anybody in the ward who listens the moment it drops. That's, oh my gosh. Anyway, the new Come Follow Me manuals are sitting on the stage. So grab one if you want one.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, this is relevant because we're covering church history next year.
Yes, it is. And we are so on top of things.
I know. Holy smokes. And then, I'm teaching this in seminary, right? And so it'll be, I think it's really going to be interesting to see what kinds of things the church leadership of today has decided to focus on these kind of parts of the history.
That's a great question. And one of the things about history is always what you leave out.
Yeah.
And for a single volume history like this, you're leaving a lot out. As we talked about, 40 pages is a very lean look at this time period.
Yeah.
You could write volumes on it. We could do a whole season on just this time period very easily and not run out of things to talk about. And so I do not want to be, I don't want to appear as casting shade on our illustrious author. But one of the things that you and I mentioned this before the show began, I was talking to you about this. One of the things I felt as I was reading this is like there are moments of this history that are kind of important to me that I feel are like important points to make that Dr. Park leaves out.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be that they're relevant thematically later, and so they'll be mentioned as sort of like, by the way, this happened, and they may come up later, they may not. The fact is, you can't put everything in 40 pages. And I'm on the record, and I will stay on the record as saying Saints, the new church-issued history, is great. And I think you can tell that it's coming out from the same generation of historians as this American Zion, because they're making similar choices in terms of how they quote sources and so forth. And yet they're making very different choices. And that's going to happen with history. Like, you can't include everything. That's not possible. And so what you choose to include and what you choose to leave out is like an enormously important decision that a historian makes.
And we're going to have to make that decision over the next hour.
We are not covering everything. Even if we do decide at the end to do more than one episode, like, we're not going to cover everything that's in this chapter.
Well, where do you want to start?
Let alone things that are missing. So I mentioned that there's really just one thing in here that is on my must-talk about list, but I feel like that happens at the end of this chronologically. And while I don't feel a need to respect chronology, absolutely, there is good reason to start roughly at the beginning and move roughly in a forward direction until we get to roughly the end. So I think we have to start at the beginning, unless you have another way you want to do it.
No, that's fine.
It starts with the conversion of important new voices like Parley Pratt and Sidney Rigdon and Brigham Young. Like, people are going to be important as the story goes on. Some of them beyond this chapter, some of them just in this chapter. And we start having new personalities. It's no longer the Joseph Smith story, the Joseph Smith and family story. And by the end of this chapter, it's not really the Joseph Smith and family story at all. That's kind of one of the main points that he's going to make, is that at the end of the Nauvoo era, the Smith family is largely... You might not believe this to look at the prophets who come afterwards, because there are a couple Smiths and they are members of the family, but largely the family is separated from their movement at the end of this chapter, which is an interesting arc to observe.
And Ben sets up this schism by using the word schism on page 50 in reference to the Mormons at the beginning.
That's craft right there.
All right, that's good foreshadowing. He's talking in this moment about how mainstream Christianity was starting to form organizations that were kind of powerful, that were forming a kind of quasi-establishment, and Mormons at this time were super experimental.
Yeah.
So like the quasi-hierarchy of the priesthood had not really been introduced yet, and so you had these kind of radical things going on, like Black Pete, like Laura Hubble, right? And people doing different and interesting things, which we're going to talk about in just a minute.
Yeah.
But later on, they started to bring in this more authority of the priesthood, and some of these stranger parts of Mormonism started to disappear. And we already, even then, started to have like small little rifts and small little schisms. And then at the end of this chapter, we're going to see, a larger schism that's going to happen in the church after this Joseph Smith's death.
Yeah.
So it's, good job, Ben.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of those riffs, both with the larger environment in which the church is being born, but also within the church itself. These are problems that America... I mean, that's one of the theses of the book, right? Is you can't really understand America or Mormonism without understanding the other one. Like, they inform each other so well that you can't separate them very easily. And so, speaking of Black Pete and Laura Hubble, they are, when the church is exploding in Ohio, they're prominent members. Laura Hubble is a prophetess. Black Pete, we don't know a whole lot about him, but he was an important member in those early days. And yet, when they try to become a little more respectable, what happens to the black man and the woman, like and the white woman? We assume I don't know if we know actually Laura Hubble's racial identity, but they are among the people who disappear, because you have to have a certain amount of radicalism to break with the problems of the outside society. And yet, when you want to not be abused by the outside society and be accepted by the outside society, one of the ways to do that is to engage in its same failures. And I think this is going to be a thesis we see over the course of church history as well.
Yeah. It's interesting. Both rejecting and participating in the kind of failures of capitalism and democracy as it was getting started is kind of a theme throughout here.
Yes. And I think this is one of the things that's going to make Brigham Young both a heroic and a villainous character, is that he's so good at bringing people together and creating a community. But one of the ways he does this is by leaving people on the outside. So we're going to talk about, or maybe we will, maybe we won't. We're going to talk about Elijah Abel, who's another black member. And he was a missionary more than once. And he was an elder at a time when not all adult males just automatically became elders. And he was a black man, and then he, it gets harder and harder to know what your place is. But this is a good place for me maybe to pitch the University of Utah's new project. Okay. That they're doing in cahoots with the church. I forget what it's called. It's called Centennial of Black Mormons, I think. There's a website, and they're trying to collect together all the historical information on every single black member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from 1830 to 1930. And you can read more about Black Pete and Elijah Abel and Jane Manning James and a whole bunch of other people by taking a trip to their website.
The county in which Zion was to be built was named Zion, after the current president Andrew Jackson,
Andrew Jackson.
Wait, I screwed up the reading of that, but whose personality and politics dominated what came to be known as the Jacksonian era, right? So Zion. Not Zion, not the Matrix pronunciation.
No. We're Latter-day Saints. We say Zion. We don't say Zion.
We don't say Zion.
And whenever I hear someone say Zion, I believe they've never seen the word, or they've only seen the word, never heard it. But I'm trying really hard to accept that maybe other people just say it differently, and that's okay.
So we're kind of starting here at the beginning. We're going to go and establish Zion.
Wait, how have you seen The Matrix?
I've seen. Oh, right. That's one of the few rated R's I've seen. I think I originally saw it on TNT, to be fair. Oh, okay. I think it was an edited version. I don't know how they edited it. There's like hardly anything to take out in that movie.
No, I can tell you what made it rated R if you're interested.
Oh, I'm sure it's the trench coats, isn't it?
No.
It's not the
trench coats. No, because it came out before that.
Oh,
or wait, or did it? It came out right around the same time, but the movie was already made, and I think it was already rated if it wasn't already out. But no, it was the point where she shoots one of the agents directly in the face.
Oh, because you're not supposed to show that.
Yeah, so they didn't. That was the thing, and they decided they wouldn't take it out. So, but it's not like bloody or anything. But that moment is what got it the R rating. Yeah.
Okay. I've got so much more to talk about R-rated movies, but that's a different conversation some other time. So Zion, we're gonna go build it in Missouri, right?
Yeah.
And so they go and they start trying to set up, right?
They try.
Oh,
I loved this detail, which I had never heard before, that when, I think it was the Partridges? Yes, when the Partridges moved to Missouri, they rented a single room from a local state senator named Lilburn Boggs.
That's a seed for later.
Wow.
I couldn't hardly believe that. Right?
That's crazy.
Because those are important.
He shows up more than once in this story. I thought he would just show up at the end, but no, he's a burgeoning character from the beginning.
Yeah, if you've not heard of Governor Boggs, he's an infamous we're gonna. It's the extermination order. We're gonna talk about that later.
Yeah, it'll come up.
It'll come up. So, the number of those who believed in the Mormon message grew from the hundreds to the tens of thousands by the 1840s. I'm quoting.
Significant growth.
Right? That growth invited internal divisions as well as external opposition. The movement established large communities in Missouri, Ohio, and Illinois, but members were also forcibly removed from all three. Expulsions that marked the boundaries for American acceptability. At stake was how much religious freedom and cultural diversity a democracy would incorporate. In the end, many Mormons concluded that Zion could not be established in the United States borders, while others, including some of the most prominent leaders, surmised that Zion was a failed mission altogether. So that's a kind of a brief summary of this whole, whole little bit.
Had a thought. We want to try this simile on for size?
Sure.
So my in-laws recently left the Bay Area, and they now live in Saratoga Springs, Utah. And if you want to see a hockey stick-shaped, what do you call that?
A swoosh?
A swoosh, yeah, like the chart thing, a graph. Go read the census numbers for Saratoga Springs on Wikipedia.
Oh.
And you'll see that this place has exploded in population, sort of like the numbers you're talking about here.
Uh-huh.
But you know what hasn't happened when they've been living there is like it hasn't been this really great community that they feel really a big part of and like a huge part of their identity, even though everybody's a member of the church. And you know what's missing? Maybe it's disaster.
Oh,
maybe when you have that kind of growth, you need terrible things to happen to give you a sense of like belonging to one another.
I don't know. I prefer to think that humans can be friends even without disasters.
We can be friendly, but and I'm not asking for friendship necessarily, but can we like feel like we share an identity?
Yeah.
I don't know that anybody in Saratoga Springs is like a proud citizen of Saratoga Springs.
But this to
it's
me,
just a place they bought a house.
This to me goes to the classic question of, am I better because of my persecutions and trials, right?
Yes.
Or would it have been fine without them, right?
We talked about this in Sunday school.
Uh-huh.
Were you there?
Yeah, I think I was. Yeah.
Anyway, like if suffering's going to happen anyway, you might as well let it make you better. It's sort of the moral I took from the story.
I think that's a better moral than I'm glad I suffered.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know that you need to be glad you suffered, but I would argue that suffering is a very successful tool in terms of making people feel like they share something.
Yeah. Well, right. So I think that when you phrase it like that it was a very useful tool.
Yeah.
That implied that someone exercised that tool. And I think the person you're ascribing the exercise of a tool like that is to God. And now we're talking about whether or not God is inflicting these horrible things on the Mormons.
In his book Teach Ye Diligently, Elder Boyd K. Packer says that every metaphor will break down if you push it too hard.
Yeah.
Repentance is like soap, but it's not really like soap if you look at it long enough, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's true for tool too. Like I did use the word tool intentionally to push your button.
Yeah.
But I do want to emphasize that all metaphors have their limitations. But I do think that suffering has that purpose. And like, isn't this the purpose of boot camp? And there, the tool is being used intentionally, right?
But do we want to say that boot camp is a good way to model?
No, I'm not. I don't want to go that far. Again, I'm just saying that it works. And if you're gonna suffer, you might as well put it to some use.
Okay, so this is we're going way off topic here.
This is the topic, Aaron.
Okay, but this is something that's really bothered me a lot in the past. And I'm
about church history or just in general?
Just in general.
Okay.
We're now just talking philosophy.
Those letters go in some order. Don't worry about it.
I'm going to give you an example because this came up with some of my friends about 8 years ago when missionaries were allowed to start using cell phones.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So here's the idea.
Yeah.
So you're a missionary. It's 1998, and you're in Brazil, and you can call home on Mother's Day.
Yeah.
And you can call home on Christmas.
Oh, yeah. I see where you're going with this.
And that's it.
Right.
Right. And now here we are 20 years later, and the church says you can use cell phones. You can call any time you want, but keep it to P days.
Yeah.
But you can talk to your folks. You can send text messages, emails.
Yeah.
There's some limitations, but it's a lot easier. And the natural response that I heard from a lot of people is that this is bad. Well, because now
everything should be hard.
Everything should be hard.
Because it was hard for me, yeah.
Right? I think that's absolute bogus.
Well,
why not?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree with you on this. But I do think that's not necessarily a correct reading of what's happened, though.
Right.
Is it easier? I don't know. Like, if I was able to call home every week, like, it wasn't that hard for me to call my parents twice a year. That wasn't a big deal. But if I've been able to call them every week, like, I don't think that would have been good for my homesickness. I think that would have worked in completely the opposite way.
I don't know, because...
I don't know, of course.
Yeah.
But I'll bet you if we do a survey, it's not good for all of them.
Maybe not all of them, but I just think that the denial of it is what caused undue suffering, I think, to a lot of people. And I think that only came from just technology. And if we can alleviate it, it'd be better.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about like handcart companies from Mormonism crossing the trail.
Yeah.
They suffered a lot.
Some of them, yeah. Some of them suffered enormously.
Some of them suffered enormously.
Some of them just walked a lot.
Are they better because they suffered that much? Are we as Mormons better because we suffered that much? Or should we have just planned our winter travels?
I mean, that was human failure. It was human failure.
Right?
Yeah. Let me ask you this.
Am I happy? I'm going to be super, super like extreme now.
Okay, go ahead.
Is it better that Joseph Smith was tarred and feathered here in these next few pages for the church?
Is it better that Jesus was crucified?
Okay, so this is where this is why I'm saying I think that the metaphor does break down right when you get to that line, but I don't think we should celebrate evil.
No,
and call it suffering that made us better.
I am okay with. I'm not. I don't think those are the same thing at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, here's. I think empathy is a difficult thing to obtain. More difficult for some people than others. A longer road to accomplish for some people than others. And I do think suffering, and I do think it's one of the goals of human life, is to become more and more fully empathetic with other people. To be able to feel what they feel and feel it with them. That's, I think, the baptismal covenant. It's more with those more. You got to become empathetic to that. We're not all great at that. Many of us are not good at it. Many of us like move in a wave, shall we say?
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you want, I mean, Jesus had the right idea in a way, right? Like his suffering allows him to understand everyone's suffering. So, Aaron, I've not had a parent die, and I am not anxious for a parent to die in order that I may better empathize with people who have had that experience. And when I do have a parent die, which is inevitable if I live long enough, I still won't have had the experience of having a parent die before their time. My parents are both in their 70s, and although I imagine they both have at least a decade to go, at this point, it's a different sort of pain than if my mom had died when I was in high school, for instance, which has happened to people that I'm sure we both know. And so by no means am I anxious for that kind of suffering in order to empathize with others, but I think it's unquestionable that if I had a parent die when I was young, that I would be able to offer more to someone else who was in that experience.
I mean, I think it's a fair point. I think it's a complicated conversation. It goes, I mean, at its core, it goes back to theodicy, right? Why does God allow pain to happen to people?
I believe is also first season.
That's also first season. Playing the hits.
Playing the hits.
So, okay. So let's go back on topic. Thanks for allowing me a philosophical digression there. So they're trying to. So we're going to start in Ohio, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bit of bouncing around. I was surprised how little play Zion's Camp was given in this chapter, which is fine with me, but you have to make cuts. And again, like, I really don't want to cast any aspersions on the editorial decisions here. I'm sure that, as Ben Park wrote, the first draft, this was much longer, and this must have been really painful to cut down.
I think he even was tweeting about it at the time when he was writing.
And I feel like he talked about it at that fireside we went to where he spoke. And so I'm empathetic to the problem, and I actually think he found a beautiful solution. I think it's a great chapter. So I don't want anything I say about what's missing to be heard as me complaining or saying he did a bad job or he's hiding something. I'm not doing anything like that. I'm just saying these are difficult choices for the historian, and But yeah, there is some back and forth between Ohio and Missouri, and you get a sense of that here, but really only just barely. It does kind of feel like one place and then another place, and then all of a sudden, oh wait, the other place is still in play. It's a difficult problem to solve, and I think he did a commendable job.
Okay, so we have folks, as you say, bouncing around between Ohio and Missouri. Yeah. Right? It gets a little...
Leadership is split.
Yeah.
We need to introduce the High Council and other kinds of leadership bishops, leadership positions. Because this is something we were talking about when we're talking about Black Pete and, was it Laura Hubble?
Mm-hmm.
They this is a point where the church is, in a sense, a true Christian anarchy, where everyone more or less, with I suppose the exception of Joseph Smith, basically kind of everybody is just in connection with Jesus. And that's beautiful and it's wonderful, but it's maybe not an easy way to run an earthly organization. And so it's yes, especially because we're split between two places, we have to have systems in place that people know who to talk to and how to get help, and a lot of that nuts and bolts stuff of just having an organization that has tens of thousands of people in it, because not everybody's going to know everybody. Even if they do feel connected by identity, you still don't know everybody if there's 10,000 people.
At this time, when they're putting together these priesthood and religious organizations, they also introduce something that Ben calls, which is a word I hadn't really seen before, communalism.
Okay. It's not in my everyday vocabulary, that's for sure.
Right?
In fact, if I were to use it, I'm not sure in what circumstances I would use it.
Yeah. I think it's a cool word because it dodges the foul communism. And
didn't sound like a commune.
Yeah, it didn't sound like a commune. And it isn't using the word consecration either, which I feel is really a Mormon word in regards to money. Like if you go and you talk and you use one and you say the LDS saints tried to live by the law of consecration, that doesn't make any sense. But if you say they tried to live by communalism, like, oh, I bet you I can infer as to what that means.
Yeah.
Right? What it meant was that Joseph Smith tried to put into place a financial system here in this early time period. This would have been in the early 1830s. I thought this was interesting because it sows the seeds in my mind towards the disastrous banking thing that's going to happen in later in the book, right?
Yes.
So, but holy smokes, it was so much communism, right? A new social system that would transform the world. And what I didn't know is that everybody was trying this.
Right. Comes up at least 3 times. This is the second time it's come up, and there's going to be another one we get to, like, sexual experimentation in America at the time.
Yeah.
This stuff's in the air.
So, religious experimentation, in other words, who gets to participate and how in religion. Financial experimentation, and, as you say, the organization of families. These are all things that Mormons are not the only ones who are experimenting with, right?
Yes.
So I'm going to read this paragraph here.
I'm listening.
Mormons were not alone in experimenting with communal living. The Young Republic's capitalistic empire created... This is the Young Republic. He's referring to the United States.
I believe that's correct.
Right. The Young Republic's capitalistic empire created plenty of dissenters. The Shakers famously formed cooperative communities in which all possessions were shared. And later we learned that they abolished all kinds of...
Yeah, I was planning on bringing them up when we talk about... Because they abolished sex and family.
And marriage.
And marriage and all that, yeah. Because the last... I believe it's the last... Yeah. I believe he's the very last Shaker. I just read the whole thing about him.
About who?
The Last Shaker.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember which magazine I read it in.
Okay.
So
we'll put a link. We'll get a link in the show notes.
I'll find it, yeah.
Continuing, nor did utopianism appeal to only the religious. Followers of the French socialist Charles Fourier proposed a series of associative schemes during the antebellum era, most notably Welsh reformer Robert Owen's New Harmony in Indiana. My desire now is to introduce into these states, Owen declared to a rapt audience in Washington, a new social system that would transform the world. The cultural obsession became so immense that Ralph Waldo Emerson complained that every reading man had a draft of a new community in his waistcoat pocket.
Yeah, I love that line.
Okay. And this goes to something that I feel like I also learned in the previous chapter, right? Mm-hmm. That Mormons were not the only ones doing this. In the previous chapter, it was revelations.
Yeah.
Right? You think about Joseph Smith receiving revelations, but he wasn't the only one. Like lots of people all over the countryside were having these kinds of religious experiences, right? And they were, and then lots of other people were experimenting in other different ways. Yes. Like I knew about lots of different religions, of course, but I didn't necessarily know.
Tumult of feelings.
Yeah, tumult of feelings, yes. Right? Because that stuff is baked into our core as Mormons, right? Yeah. We, James 1:5-6, and we talk about a tumult of feelings.
But this is the danger of a narrative, right? Is to tell a certain story, you have to leave stuff out.
Yeah. And in this case, we were leaving out all of the other people who were trying out all these different things as well. Of course, the law of... There's a great sentence. Talks about the law of consecration, right?
Yeah.
And then a paragraph later says... Mormons' consecration experiment, I should say, what they were doing was they were trying to make all things be common.
Everybody gives everything to the bishop, and the bishop redistributes it according to your needs.
Right. Okay. So, Mormons' consecration experiment, despite its ideas, fell apart almost immediately.
It had the great watch story. You want to tell the watch story?
Yeah. One convert, Hermit Bassett, walked up to another, Levi Hancock, swiped Hancock's watch out of his pocket, and walked off, as though it was his. When confronted, Bassett retorted that he thought it was all in the family.
Did you ever have sort of angst-ridden conversations about this in like youth Sunday school?
Oh, 100%. And the reason why I think they were angst-ridden is because my Sunday school was in the 80s.
Yes.
And we were still pretty close to McCarthy.
Yeah, and I think so. And I remember...
Oh, it was the Cold War, too. Don't forget that.
It was the Cold War. I remember talking about that, or post-Cold War, but not very post.
Yeah.
I remember a conversation where we were like, we have to give everything when we do this again someday, right? Like our family photos, and the teacher was like, well, people get back, nobody needs your family photos, so of course, you'll get those back, or you'll keep them in the first. I can't remember exactly how he landed on it, but But actually, this whole process is actually enormously complicated. Simpler for simpler people, but the more stuff we have as a people, the more complicated this process gets. I don't know, maybe stuff's contrary to Christianity.
I feel like this is like college freshman philosophy 101. Would this ever work? I mean, is there any universe in which, in our celestial kingdom here, that we could do something like this and actually have it stick?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's a really good question. I think it's really interesting to talk about, but I don't believe it's interesting to listen to other people talk about it.
All right, fair enough. Well, let's move on then. Let's talk about banking. Well, actually, no, that's too big of a skip. So, about this time, we have the vision.
The vision. Oh, yeah. Oh, I get to promote my little talk again.
Okay, good.
Do you remember this that I gave during the beginning of the pandemic in the Steak Fireside series?
Yeah, I do.
One about the vision. It's good. It wasn't about the vision. It was about the first vision and art of the first vision, but I spent a bit of time talking about the vision. So you only have to watch like the first 5 minutes max to get the vision part.
So this happened shortly around this time. There were like 60 revelations during the first 3 years in Ohio, a quantity and quality that would not be matched for the rest of his prophetic career. So this was
the rest of the church's prophetic career.
That's right.
To the best of our knowledge. Certainly not canonized.
This was a big deal. We get the word of wisdom. We get hot drinks. We get tobacco.
We get a lot of the stuff that makes us us.
Yeah. Right. And then quoting again, few revelations compared in scope and audacity with one Smith received on a cold February day in 1832. So this was the vision.
The vision. What page are you on?
It's 53.
Thank you.
And it's nowadays we know it as DNC 76. 76?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
All right.
76.
And it is the vision of the celestial, terrestrial, and telestial kingdom.
That's right.
It's our tripartite.
Brigham Young confessed he could not understand the new teachings according to Ben Park, but if you want more about what Brigham Young said, watch my fireside. He had a hard time with it.
He had a hard time. Well, because it was bananas to them.
It's bananas. Like, everybody gets saved. What about hell, Aaron? Right. How are we supposed to be motivated if we're not going to go to hell?
How could the people who not believe in Christ end up in a kingdom of glory?
Yeah, what is this? Although, it's worth pointing out that this has been causing people difficulty for a long time, right? This is part of the reason that purgatory was invented, or limbo, or limbo's just for babies. Limbo's gone now. It doesn't
I can't
exist. God discontinued it. But in like Dante's Inferno, like the outermost circle of hell, or the Inferno, is pretty nice, because it's like Aristotle needs somewhere to be, but he doesn't get to go to heaven, so he gets to hang out there, and it's like not so bad.
Righteous but unfaithful, I think, is how it's described.
In the DNC?
No, I mean limbo itself.
Oh, limbo itself.
The first circle of hell.
But unbaptized babies also go there, right?
There you go.
Yeah. Again, not anymore.
Okay.
Not anymore. Yeah.
Excellent.
I don't want anyone to think that I'm by no means. I have to talk, because Catholicism is so...
And we have a Catholic listener.
Oh, yeah. And Catholicism is so built into Western culture that, like, you have to be, like, have a basic literacy. Like, I teach literature. Like, I'm going to talk about Catholicism and, like, Catholic ideas. Like, I have to. And I try to get things right. And I know that I forget the details. I bet you, if you want, Aaron, you could link to Limbo in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
There's a great Wikipedia article about it, and I used to know this stuff, but it hasn't come up recently.
What I want to talk about is how this revelation was received.
Okay?
This was so interesting to me. Like I said, I learned things when I was reading this chapter, right?
Yeah.
While Smith and Rigdon worked on their translation of the that's Sidney Rigdon, worked on their translation of the Bible, the two were struck by a passage that implied multiple heavens. This prompted a shared vision of a three-tiered afterlife. Entranced, Smith and Rigdon alternately asked, "What do I see?" Once provided a description, the inquisitor responded, "I see the same." A crowded room of observers watched in silence as the two leaders regaled each other with descriptions of God and a multi-layered system of eternal reward. Other than the sons of perdition who followed Satan into outer darkness, everyone who inherited one of three degrees of glory. Celestial, terrestrial, telestial.
It lasted several hours.
It lasted several hours. This theophany.
I love this story, honestly.
And due to its enormity, became known as the vision.
Yeah, so I love this story because there's nothing else really like it.
Yeah.
And I just love this way of obtaining a vision. Like, it's kind of beautiful and marvelous and well witnessed for those, worried about that. And I also, it's not here, but I love the anecdote at the end where Rigdon is totally exhausted. And Joseph is like, I guess he's not as used to it.
That's right.
Didn't make the book, but I like that. I like that story. That must have been a hard darling to kill.
It's really cool because whenever I say that I learned something from this chapter, I just want to, because I know that it's possible that people in my past lives will be like, I taught you that. Look, I'm 46. I might have forgotten things by now.
Yeah, that's easy to prove, I think.
But I thought this was really cool, this shared vision.
Yeah.
And I just wonder what it was like. And also, how did that end up become structured as it is into the kind of smooth prose that is D&D?
Oh, another fun thing about 76 is it's one of two known poems that Joseph Smith worked on. He worked probably with W.W. Phelps trying to translate this, to rewrite it into a poetic form, because he didn't feel that they'd captured it right. He thought maybe poetry would be the way to go.
Huh.
And you can read it. It's out there online.
A poem version of the first vision.
Yeah, it's quite long.
Not the first vision. The vision. Of the vision. That's cool. Okay, so we're moving forward. We're our plan of attack on these topics is kind of just to go through it and pick out the things that we liked. The revelation proved divisive. These are heresies essentially, and this is where he gets tarred and feathered for the first time.
I had forgotten a lot of the horrific details of their original intentions.
Yeah,
like they had murder on their mind, or at least total and permanent incapacitation.
So the combinations of Smith's heresies and his instructions that all believers would eventually move to Missouri courted a violent reaction. So we're not going to describe it. If you want, you can go and look at it.
Buy the book.
But because you can buy the book. But it's horrific. And I think that being tarred and feathered and the recovery of it, there's a sentence here in here, I don't know if I can find it right now, where Ben speculates essentially that this event, this was a moment for him, right?
For Joseph Smith.
This pain that he went through, and it's gonna affect like Can you imagine how paranoid that would make you going forward?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You know that this could happen again.
Yeah. And also something that hadn't occurred to me before, but has great explanatory power. And I assume this is not original to Ben Park, but it never occurred to me that, quote, Rigdon, meanwhile, likely suffered permanent brain damage, unquote. Probably. And that would explain kind of his decline immediately afterwards.
Because he was a big figure.
Yeah, and I'd never thought of it this way, but I've known some people with serious brain damage, and yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And his kid died. It's just horrible. The trauma, I found the sentence, the trauma from this early episode of persecution framed how the saints understood their relation to the wider world.
And we're still not totally over it. It's
we're
kind
not
of reinforced by the following decades.
Yeah. You and I are not over it.
Oh, no.
When you say we're being literal.
And like I have spent a lot of my adulthood trying to get over it. But speaking of Wikipedia, have I talked about this?
No.
So, Wikipedia, I love Wikipedia. I'm a big fan of Wikipedia, but it has some real flaws in terms of its community. Like, I was part of a recent sort of purge in which like Mormon editors were harassed and driven away and chased off, essentially. And it's happened to other people. It's happened to indigenous writers, editors of Wikipedia. It's happened to Jewish editors of Wikipedia. And Wikipedia doesn't really have good systems in place to protect groups like us. And so for the first time in my life, last spring, I really felt that I was the victim of anti-Mormon persecution.
Okay.
Like it happened, and there was no way around it. And I just don't edit Wikipedia that much anymore. They successfully drove me off.
Wow. As we move through this chapter, we're going to be going over things that the saints did that probably would have made people around them angry.
Yeah.
Okay. But this, listen, if you are listening to the show and you're not a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I'm telling you that this stuff here haunts us to this day. It's been 200 years.
It's true by body count. We have it pales in comparisons to things like the Holocaust or slavery.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, of course. But if there's one thing that American culture has become better at, although we've also seen a lot of rebellion against this, is like recognition that trauma is real and informs people's experience, and you have to pay attention to it. And how trauma changes persons and peoples. And we're not over it as a people.
We're not over it. And we try to be over it.
We try to at least we recognize like the limited severity. We recognize how far we've come in the world, and we try to pretend that everything's okay. And then it was interesting. Last spring in my AP classes, I was teaching Frankenstein, which I had not taught in a few years, and I think 2 years, I guess. And the reason I hadn't taught it is because the last time I taught it, I'd had a Muslim student who was really, really hurt by the chapter. There's a chapter in Frankenstein, if you haven't read it, where Mary Shelley's characters engage in some really like anti-Islam kind of sentiment. Very typical of her time. And there's no question, I've read 2 of her novels, there's no question that like she didn't question it. Like she didn't think that there was another way to think about Islamic people. They were just these horrible Eastern monsters. I mean, I'm overstating a little bit. Mary Shelley's a great writer and a humanist, but it's definitely a blind spot that she had. And I was really humbled by how bothered she was by it, because like I knew it was coming and I planned on talking about it and like putting it in and so forth. Like I really planned on doing that. But I didn't really understand how traumatic that could be for people who are used to being persecuted for their identity, that chapter. So this is the first time I taught it, and the day before, we wrapped up our conversation on Frankenstein early, and also like, it was just a few months from October 7th, and then Israel's brutal war on Palestine since then. Like everything was ugly. Everything's still ugly. I don't know. Everything's still pretty bad. Today, the day we're recording, I think it was yesterday, the World Court put out warrants for the arrest of Netanyahu and the leader of Hamas, who Israel says they've killed him. Anyway, it's not clear up, and it will probably never
I don't know. I like to have faith, but it's hard to believe that things are going to get good over there. But my point is, like, I hadn't really talked about it in class. And so we talked about, I didn't say it was about Frankenstein, but we talked about religious persecution. We used both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian issue as examples and talked about and the difference between people and who make decisions and people who are, part of a culture, and like those aren't the same people. And we talked about a lot of that stuff, and I shared my Wikipedia story, and not to garner a lot of sympathy per se. That wasn't my goal, but just to sort of model how one deals with such things. Because as a straight white man in America, I don't have a lot of opportunities to be part of an oppressed culture. So again, like, suffering gave me the opportunity for empathy that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah, fair enough.
And then that night we read Frankenstein, and when we came back the next day and we talked about that section, everybody had a much different context because people tended not to notice that stuff. The same semester that the girl broke down about Frankenstein, in the dystopia unit, one of the groups read J.G. Ballard's The Drowned World. And I read it also because my son was in that group. And I'd never read the book, and I've been meaning to, and I read it, the novel, and the book is, like, so racist.
Oh.
And this is, I think, the third group to ever choose the book and to read the book, and not one of those groups had ever noticed the racism. Even though we're talking about it as a dystopian, what's wrong with this world, nobody had noticed the racism. Like, it had only been read by students who apparently were not equipped to either see it or to remember it once they'd seen it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was really troubled by that. Like, it's really easy not to see other people suffering, which, to try to bring this back to this is a very long tangent,
mm-hmm.
but my point is that, yes, it is part of our identity, but it's part of a lot of people's identities.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can really understand any people without understanding their trauma. Like, and I think failure to recognize trauma is, or what other people perceive as their trauma, and whether it actually should be or not is not the question I'm talking about here. But perceiving what other people see as the slights against them and the things that have hurt them is, I think, a big part of what leads to a society in which people don't see each other. Because if you don't see what hurts someone, you're missing a huge part of what makes them them. Whether it'd be great if we could all pretend that everyone is unharmed by the world, but we all are, and it reaches a point where, to be understood by someone, you have to understand what happened to them that they wish didn't happen to them.
I agree. I wanted to comment on this idea of trauma and this idea of highs and lows. We saw the vision. That was a high. And we see this tar and feathering, that's a low, right? And the two together are part of the same story.
Yeah. And I mean, the idea of this sort of universalist heaven that we have is also a huge part of what makes us who we are as a people.
Ohio and Missouri.
Yeah.
Two different places.
Can I say, as we're transitioning to Missouri, to me, like, the point where the story shifted most completely to Missouri is where the Partridges move into that Boggs apartment, like we talked about a moment ago. And though only 8 years old, this section begins, the young Emily Dow Partridge was struck by the differences between Ohio and Missouri. And, like, it's an 8-year-old girl who becomes our point of view character for this paragraph. And one thing that I really like about this book is how we're getting to hear points of view that we haven't necessarily heard before. It's not just what Joseph Smith said and Oliver Cowdery and Martin Harris, just talk about the last chapter. It's not just the three witnesses. There are lots of witnesses now, and he's doing a good job of bringing in voices. And that's one of the reasons he felt like the book could be written, because there's so much more information available from the time period that was inaccessible until quite recently. But I love that about the book. Even though I didn't learn a lot of, like, important facts necessarily from reading this chapter that I didn't already know, I felt like I got into a lot of great context just from other voices and other perspectives that were new to me. And that's what I actually appreciated, I think, most about the chapter, is just the different angles and hearing from, especially, I'm not sure, you and I were talking about this before we started recording, I think there might be more women quoted. Maybe not more total words, but in terms of number of speakers, I think there might be more women than men in this chapter. And honestly, that brought the book to life in a way which if it had just been Joseph Smith, and it's not that I dislike Joseph Smith, but I've heard a lot of Joseph Smith, and these other voices were really great. And I felt like the transition to Missouri and that moment with Emily was a moment where that really happened for me in terms of the storytelling.
The title of the chapter is The Voice of the People.
Oh my gosh, you're right.
I do feel you were speculating before we started that whether it was intentional. I think it might be.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
There's a great plat.
Yes, I love this drawing.
I
have an enormously high-res version of this somewhere.
Do you really?
Yeah. So if I had it, I must have got it off the internet. It must be on the internet somewhere. But like intensely high-res. Like if you printed it out,
you can't really see the detail here.
It would probably fill this room big.
The city of Zion. So, oh, geez, I almost just matrixed it on accident.
It sounded like maybe you did.
Okay, the city of Zion, circa August 1833. This is a plat, which I guess is a drawing of some kind, and it shows the.
No, I believe I could be wrong. We should check a dictionary.
Oh, right.
But I think a plat is the land.
But I mean. It's a picture in my book.
Yes, but it's a picture of land.
It's a picture of land.
We might both be right. Maybe it has two definitions.
Well,
we both end happy today.
Let's find out. It's a plot of land.
Yay! Sorry.
All right.
I'm bad. I just celebrated.
Well, I think this is what we're seeing here is kind of how the layout of these plats.
Yes.
And the idea was
Did you hear about the
Wait,
guy?
nope, wait.
Okay, sorry.
Wait.
Go ahead.
There's 12 temples in the middle.
That's interesting. I wonder.
No, 24. There's 24 temples in the middle.
2 sets of 12. Yeah,
Two sets of 12.
That's what I'm most curious about. Is like, what were they all going to be?
Yeah, and then a huge city around it. Okay, did I hear?
A few years ago, I want to say this was maybe a couple years pre-pandemic.
This never happened.
It's not quite.
Okay,
no.
so just let's be clear. This was a grand ideal for a Zion in Missouri, and it didn't happen.
But yeah, a few years ago, Mormon architect home builder guy bought a bunch of land, I want to say in Maine, and was going to build the city.
Oh.
He was going to build it according to Joseph Smith's plans and invite people to come, and like, it didn't happen.
Yeah, I don't know.
Didn't happen.
It's cold in Maine.
Yeah, it didn't happen. I'm pretty sure it was Maine. We'll look it up.
Or maybe. Well.
Or maybe we'll just let that one go.
I don't know.
Let his unsuccess not get extra fingers pointed at it.
Oh, that's funny. All right, sorry.
Maybe you'll cut it out.
If he's a listener, I apologize.
And no, I actually thought it was really cool, a cool idea, and I would love actually for this city to be built, just to see how it goes.
You should watch. Maybe I'll send you a link. The Epcot video by Defunct Land.
Oh,
it's awesome.
I bet. I've only
the future city that was planned for Florida.
That's on my watch later, actually.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so they were going to do that. Of course, mob violence happened. So why were they so picked on in Missouri, right?
Well, how do you say bad at making friends? I mean, here's the thing. When you're excited about something, and I worry about coming off this way, like coming off as like this smarmy know-it-all on this podcast, but it's kind of like the kid who comes to school and he's super excited about his new backpack and his new shoes, and he just wants to tell people about it, and his friend hasn't had new shoes for a long time and they don't fit him anymore, and his backpack is his brother who handed it down to his sister, who handed it down to his brother, who handed it down to him, and it's got a hole in the bottom that's been duct taped 3 or 4 times. Like, the first friend isn't trying to be mean, he's not trying to be a jerk, but it doesn't make the second kid feel good.
Yeah.
And that's what they were doing.
Okay.
Like, oh, we got Jesus. Oh, we're going to be friends with the Indians. Oh, like we're gonna we believe that like God loves everybody, and like no, not in a slave state. He doesn't.
I think that was called out as one of the sources of conflicts.
Yeah, that was probably the big one, because I don't know if it's because they felt bad about it deep down inside or something, but yeah, Southerners didn't like it when people told them slavery was bad. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but they went to war about it at one point.
Here's a quote. One Mormon editorial in their newly established newspaper was misread as inviting black migration. The editor quickly clarified that he did not seek to disrupt Missouri's slaveholding society, but the divide became unbridgeable.
You know, I think maybe he did mean to do that and didn't realize that God wasn't just going to make everything he said true. So I think there was a lot of like the miracle, like that Oprah's book that she promoted, right? Like if you just want it enough, it's going to happen. I think the Saints were doing a lot of that when they got to Missouri.
One thing that was satisfying, I didn't realize at this time, but thinking about this chapter now, was that some of the narratives I cling to as are actually like historically validated.
Yes.
Right? Like I was taught in the 80s that one of the reasons that we were kicked out of Missouri was that we had too much political voting power, right? And that we had the desire to form a city and a new people there, and that was threatening to a lot of the political people. And it's nice, 30 years later, to see, that's actually what did happen.
Yeah.
I've had too many of these things like knocked down.
Yeah.
So anyway, but regardless, so
the sad one, the one I'm sad about in this chapter, and he didn't talk about it, but like there isn't really good contemporary evidence that Brigham Young started looking like Joseph Smith. Like pretty soft on the evidence for that story.
You're skipping way ahead.
I'm skipping way ahead, but I was just saying, like as a contrast, like I wish that story were more documentable because I like that story.
That's a great story,
but alas, it did not happen.
Yeah. So mob violence was a common way to handle such clashes.
This is an important thing to remember, is that this is kind of normal.
Yeah.
Like I saw my first mob 4 years ago.
Sure.
Yeah, that was the first time I saw a mob and saw how it functioned. But in in America, mobs weren't that unusual.
Yeah, we have a history with them. Apparently,
people knew how to do a mob.
People knew how to mob. So okay, what do we got? People are burning things. The Mormons are told that they have until the end of the year to leave. Smith demands justice.
Just elected Lieutenant Governor Lilburn Boggs oversaw a mob. That answers the question. Like people say, what's the job of a lieutenant governor? Just get up and read the newspaper and see if the governor's died. If not, go back to bed, right?
Right.
He made work for himself. He found a purpose. We should all be more like Lilburn Boggs.
Okay, quote him. Just snip that right on out.
Yes.
No context is needed. But yeah, Joseph demanded justice. Of course, he never got it, and it just got worse. And eventually, they formed an army.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. This is a little sideways, but you know what story is missing?
Okay.
Speaking of stories that are missing, and this is surprising because, like we were talking about, Park's done a really good job of like showing where women are at in these stories.
Yeah.
But to me, like the most classic story of women doing something in the Missouri era that is heroic and important and matters and has had a lasting impact is actually a story about two girls, the girls who saved the Book of the Commandments from Huntsville? Wherever that particular disaster was.
So that happens later than we are right now.
That's true. It does happen later, but I just realized that's missing, and it is part of this like
there's
continuing mess.
Well, it mentions pages being sewn into someone's dress.
It does mention that, yeah. But the two girls is like a classic story that gets repeated a lot and is documented. But again, like I'm not passing judgment here. It's just interesting to see how authors make decisions.
So there were so the Mormons tried to put together like a little militia, right?
Yeah.
And there was a march, and it kind of all fizzled out, and then the Mormons were forced out. The Missouri authorities created a new county in the northern part of the state named Caldwell that was reserved for Mormon settlement. The solution echoed what was posited for indigenous peoples during the same decade: forced removal and geographic segregation. Mormons never recovered from losing Zion.
Yeah.
Smith's vision that Jackson County was God's chosen gathering place never abated. His followers has ever since dreamt of their triumphant and prophesied return. Nor did Mormons ever forgive the Missourians for evicting them from their property, or the government for failing to intervene. Their many grievances, piled high, shaped how the saints understood the relationship to American society.
Well, and it also explains, I think, a feeling that we at least historically have had of being on the side of the minority. There's this quote from the Missouri governor who said his hands were tied because the public has no other interest in it. In other words, Mr. Park says, in a majoritarian culture, the majority's voice ruled.
Yeah.
And we've never been comfortable with the idea that the majority can just run over the minority. Although, I'm sure as we go on in this book, we'll find exceptions where we become the majority and feel like it's okay. But I think this is also part of our identity, is the idea that a society should be pluralistic. It should allow for different groups of people. Sure, we believe that, the rock has rolled out and will fill the whole earth, and that and we believe that Jesus will come and all the earth will be Zion, and we believe all these things, but those things are not today. Those things are in process or in the future, and I feel like this is where we become sort of the great believers in a pluralistic society.
Yeah.
Although I've been reading a lot about like Latter-day Saints and our politics over the last, I don't know, I guess since Mitt Romney ran for president, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if this opinion is necessarily as fully formed as I used to believe. Maybe I've always been wrong, or maybe it's changing. I don't know. But I don't know.
What was the opinion again?
That pluralism is good, that all minority groups should be treated well under the law, and that the tyranny of the majority is something to be prevented.
I think it's probably right.
I hope so.
Yeah. We're at our hour here.
Oh, okay.
We're kind of nowhere close.
No, we have you heard of a place called Nauvoo?
Yeah.
Not important.
Yeah. We still got a bunch of polygamy to do.
Oh, jeez. We got Eliza Snow, who I understand was like your favorite part of the chapter.
Yeah, it was interesting. We're going to get to that. I learned stuff that I just, like I said, this has all been there in the peripheral that I've seen about, but never really knew myself.
Yeah.
Or at least hadn't internalized. Maybe that's a good way to put it. Well, let's stop here.
Okay.
We'll make this one a two-parter. We won't necessarily do the rest of the chapters as two-parters, but
yeah,
I don't think it's worth trying to rush through it.
No, I mean, and I'm not sure it's worth it asking everybody to download a 3-hour podcast either. So
yeah, I mean, with the set reviews for Magic the Gathering are 4 hours long.
Is my language wrong?
What's that?
Is saying like I just said download a podcast and you said show. Is that like saying like I'm going to like the difference between blog and blog post? Like is that the equivalent?
A podcast is an object. A show is a...
Well, yeah, a podcast is like the whole thing.
Yeah. And
the concept of the thing entire. Whereas a show would be a piece. Whereas like a blog versus a blog post, you don't like. I'm not going to go read a blog. I mean, yeah. Except for you could say that.
Yep, and you can say you're downloading a podcast. Yeah, you're listening to I'm listening to my podcast.
Yeah,
you're well within the boundaries of
that hasn't that
convention.
Linguistic question has not settled into a place that puts me on the outside. Okay, that's good to know.
Okay, so just to wrap up,
everything's going great.
Everything that's not the case.
Hate it. I wasn't
listening. We have a lot more to go over. We'll do that again. And thanks for coming along with us. Very much enjoying this speed run through Mormonism's history.
Yeah. So far, so good.
If you have opinions, please share them on Discord.
Yes, and we are we're halfway to a new mic setup.
Yeah.
So maybe next time we'll see if
we somehow screwed up the audio again this time, but.
But we do. People sometimes seem shy, but like, no, don't be shy.
Yeah.
Tell us if the sound is bad because we want to fix it.
Yeah, and I'm holding my new mixer here in my hands, and we were very close to being able to use it. Yeah. We were just missing one little piece.
Yeah. So next time.
Our music's by Daniel Foster Smith, and we're a proud member of the Dialogue Podcasting Network.
Speaking of Dialogue, I have a poem in the new issue. It's called Homesteaders. You should check it out. And I have a short story coming out in the next issue called I Dreamed of Oil.
You're so cool.
Oh, thanks.
All right. Bye, Eric.
Bye.